My MIL went to my workplace and told my boss I was an unfit mother, ATA. My mother-in-law showed up at my workplace and told my boss I was an unfit mother. I had her escorted out by security. My name is Jennifer. I am 35 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 10 months ago my mother-in-law walked into the marketing firm where I have worked for 8 years, asked to speak to my supervisor, and told him that I was neglecting my children and that my husband should have full custody of our kids. My supervisor is a man named David who has known me for 8 years and who looked at Linda standing in his office and then looked at me when I arrived 30 seconds later because my assistant had texted me immediately and felt something I can only describe as the professional equivalent of a floor dropping out from under you. My husband and I were not divorcing. There was no custody dispute. There was no context in which what Linda had done made any logical sense except the context of Linda herself, which I will explain. My husband's name is Thomas. We have been married for 9 years, and we have 2 children, Oliver, who is 7, and Lily, who is 5. We are not a family in crisis. We are a family with a mother-in-law who had decided 3 weeks earlier that I was not raising her grandchildren correctly and who had apparently concluded that involving my employer was a proportionate response to that opinion. The inciting incident was a birthday party. Oliver's 7th birthday party had been planned as a small backyard gathering 12 children, a cake I had made myself, a bouncy castle Thomas had rented. Linda had arrived uninvited 2 hours early with her own cake, a large elaborate 3-tier cake she had ordered from a bakery, and had placed it on the table next to mine. When I asked her quietly to please take her cake home, because Oliver had been excited about my cake, specifically she had become upset and had said in front of several early arriving parents that I was always trying to exclude her from her grandchildren's lives. I had asked her to leave. Thomas had supported my asking her to leave. Linda had left. That had been 3 weeks before the workplace incident. In those 3 weeks, Linda had called Thomas 11 times. Thomas had answered 4 times and had been clear each time that what she had done at the party was not acceptable and that she needed to apologize to me before any restoration of normal contact would be possible. Linda had not apologized. She had instead apparently decided that if Thomas was not going to take her side, she would make her case to someone who could apply professional pressure to our family situation. What she had told my supervisor David was a collection of concerns that were vague enough to be unverifiable and specific enough to suggest she had been collecting grievances for some time. She told him I worked too many hours. She told him I was often distracted during family time. She told him my children had mentioned being lonely. None of these things were true in any form I recognized, and none of them were David's business, and none of them had any relationship to my professional performance, which had been consistently strong for 8 years. David told me privately afterward that he had understood within approximately 90 seconds that what was happening had nothing to do with my job performance and everything to do with a family situation he was not equipped to mediate. He had been professional and had listened, and had then called security because Linda had refused to leave when he indicated the meeting was over. I had Linda escorted out of my building by 2 security guards. I watched this happen from David's doorway. Then I went back to my desk, and I sat there for a moment, and I decided I was going to handle this completely and permanently. I called an attorney that afternoon. Not a divorce attorney. A civil harassment attorney named Patricia, who told me that what Linda had done constituted workplace harassment and that I had grounds for a cease and desist letter and potentially more depending on whether the behavior continued. The cease and desist was sent to Linda through Patricia's office the following week. It detailed specifically what had occurred and what the legal consequences of continued contact with my employer, my children's school, or any other third-party institution in my life would be. Thomas supported every step of this process. He had been on the phone with Patricia with me, had signed documentation as a co-complainant, had told his mother directly that he supported the legal response, and that she had left them no choice. Linda retained her own attorney, who sent a response suggesting the cease and desist was an overreaction to a concerned grandmother expressing worry about her grandchildren. Patricia's response to that was 4 pages and was not warm. Linda has not contacted my employer since. She has not contacted my children's school. She has not shown up at any location uninvited in 10 months. Thomas and I are in couples therapy not because our marriage is in trouble, but because navigating his mother's behavior has required us to build a shared understanding and a shared strategy that we did not previously have, and that therapy has helped us construct. Thomas said something in our third session that I have thought about many times since. He said he had spent 40 years believing his mother's behavior was something he had to manage around rather than something he had the right to address directly, and that he was learning the difference between those two things. Update: 4 months later. Linda sent me a card last month. A physical card, handwritten, delivered through Thomas rather than directly to me, which itself suggested she had received some guidance about appropriate channels. The card acknowledged that what she had done had been wrong. It did not fully explain why she had done it, and it did not use the word sorry in direct terms, but it said she had caused harm and that she understood that, and that she wanted to do better. I read the card 3 times. I showed it to Patricia, who said it was not legally significant, but was personally notable. I showed it to Thomas, who said it was the most honest communication his mother had sent him in his adult life. I have not responded to it yet. I am deciding whether responding serves anything useful, or whether the cease and desist and its continued effectiveness is the actual communication that matters. Oliver turned 8 last month. We had a backyard party with 12 children and a cake I made myself. It was exactly what I planned. Nobody arrived uninvited. Maya Mile has been giving my children gifts I specifically said no to. I donated every single one to charity, without telling her. My name is Sandra. I am 38 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado, and for 3 years my mother-in-law has been engaged in what I can only describe as a sustained gift-giving campaign designed to undermine every parenting boundary my husband and I have established. I donated the gifts to charity. All of them. 43 items over 3 years. I did not tell her until 3 months ago. My mother-in-law's name is Ruth. She is 66 years old, and she is a generous person in the way that some generous people are, generosity deployed as a form of authority, gifts as a mechanism for communicating that her judgment about what my children need supersedes mine. My children are twins, Noah and Emma, now 8 years old. When Noah and Emma were 5, my husband Daniel and I established some clear guidelines about gifts for them. Nothing with excessive sugar, no violent video games, no screen-based toys beyond what we had already introduced, clothing only in the sizes and styles we had approved because Emma has sensory issues that make certain fabrics and fits genuinely distressing for her. We communicated these guidelines to Ruth clearly and in writing because Ruth had a history of receiving verbal communication selectively, and I had learned that written communication at least created a record. Ruth responded to the written guidelines by ignoring them with a consistency that suggested deliberateness rather than forgetfulness. The first Christmas after the guidelines, she gave Noah a video game that was age inappropriate and Emma a dress in a fabric and fit that Emma refused to wear and cried when pressed. I donated both items that week. The following birthday, she gave a large bag of candy and 2 more screen toys. Donated. Easter produced a basket of candy and a toy I had specifically named in our written guidelines as not appropriate. Donated. Over 3 years, 43 items were received and donated. I kept a spreadsheet. Each item, the date received, the guideline it violated, the organization it was donated to. I kept the spreadsheet not because I planned to use it, but because documenting things is how I manage situations that are otherwise outside my control, and the spreadsheet gave me something to do with the frustration that arriving at Ruth's house and watching her hand my children something I had said no to would otherwise have had nowhere to go. Daniel knew about the donations from the beginning. He had agreed with me that accepting and using the gifts sent a message we were not willing to send, and that donating them without announcement was cleaner than confrontation after every holiday. He had spoken to Ruth twice about the guidelines and had been met with the explanation that she was their grandmother and that she knew what children needed. Daniel had not pushed further because pushing further with Ruth had historically produced responses that made things worse rather than better. 3 months ago, Ruth asked Emma why she never wore the dress from last Christmas. Emma, who is 8 and honest, said she did not have the dress anymore. Ruth asked what had happened to it. Emma said Mommy had given it away. Ruth called me that afternoon. The conversation lasted 22 minutes and was not calm. Ruth said she had spent significant money on gifts for her grandchildren and that I had been donating them without telling her for 3 years, and that this was disrespectful and wasteful, and that I had no right to make those decisions unilaterally. I told Ruth that I had every right to make decisions about items brought into my home and given to my children, and that the decisions I had made were consistent with guidelines I had communicated to her in writing 3 years earlier. I told her I had a spreadsheet and that I would send it to her if she wanted documentation of every item and the guideline it had violated. Ruth said she did not want the spreadsheet. I sent it anyway because I had it and because I felt it was important for her to understand the pattern she was being shown. Daniel spoke to his mother the following day. It was the most direct he had been with her in our 9 years of marriage. He told her that the guidelines existed for real reasons. Emma's sensory issues are real. The screen limitations are real. The dietary choices are ours to make. And that continuing to disregard them was not generosity, it was a statement about whose authority over our children she recognized. Ruth has given 4 gifts since the spreadsheet conversation. All 4 were within the guidelines. 2 of them, books that Emma has read 3 times each, have been genuinely wonderful, and Emma has asked for more from the same series. I have told Ruth that Emma loves the books. Ruth looked at me when I said it in a way that told me she understood this was me meeting her where she had arrived, and that the arriving had been what mattered. Update: 3 months later. Ruth asked me last month if I would send her the guidelines again because she wanted to make sure she had the current version. I sent them. She printed them. Daniel saw them on her kitchen counter on a recent visit, printed and placed under a refrigerator magnet. He told me about it that evening, and I sat with that image for a while. A piece of paper I had written 3 years ago under a refrigerator magnet in Ruth's kitchen. I do not know what it means exactly, but it means something, and the something feels like progress, and I am choosing to call it that. AITA, my mother-in-law moved to our city without telling us. I found out when she knocked on my door and said she had bought a house 2 streets away. My name is Laura. I am 37 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and 7 months ago my mother-in-law knocked on my front door on a Tuesday afternoon and told me she had purchased a house 2 streets away and had moved in the previous weekend. I had not known she was considering moving to Portland. My husband had not known. Nobody in our immediate family had known. Margaret had sold her house in Phoenix, purchased a house in Portland, arranged and completed the move, and presented the accomplished fact to us on a Tuesday afternoon as though it were pleasant news she was excited to share. My husband's name is Kevin, and he is 39, and he loves his mother with a genuine warmth that I have always respected, and that was visible on his face when I called him from the kitchen while Margaret was still standing in my doorway, a complicated expression that contained both the warmth and the specific recognition of someone who knows his mother well enough to understand what a house 2 streets away, without prior discussion, means for the next several decades. I want to be clear about who Margaret is, because I do not want the story to be a simple villain narrative, because simple villain narratives are not accurate. Margaret is 68 years old, and she is warm and funny and genuinely good with our children. We have 2, Clara, who is 9, and Ben, who is 6, and she has been a loving grandmother in the ways that have mattered. What Margaret also is someone who operates on the assumption that her desires and the people she loves desires are naturally aligned, and that acting on her desires is therefore always welcome. She had wanted to be closer to Kevin and the grandchildren. She had experienced this wanting as something Kevin and I would obviously also want. She had therefore acted on the wanting without a conversation because the conversation felt to her like a formality rather than a necessity. Kevin and I had a conversation that evening that was one of the more important ones of our marriage. Kevin said he understood why I was unsettled, and that he was also unsettled, and that we needed to figure out together what we wanted to do about it rather than reacting from either of our initial positions. I said I appreciated that, and that what I wanted to do about it was have a direct conversation with Margaret about the fact that moving 2 streets away, without discussion, was something that affected our family and that required acknowledgement before we could figure out what the new reality was going to look like. Kevin said he would have that conversation with Margaret, and he did the following evening, at her new house, which I had not yet been inside. He came home and told me that Margaret had been genuinely surprised that we were not simply happy. She had believed she was giving us a gift. Kevin had told her that the gift required our consent to be a gift, and that showing up as a fact rather than a conversation was not how gifts worked. Margaret had cried. Kevin had stayed with her until she was okay, and then had come home. Margaret came to our house 2 days later, and she said something that I have thought about since. She said she had spent so many years being too far away, and that the being too far away had been so painful that when she finally had the means to fix it, she had fixed it without stopping to think about whether fixing it her way was fixing it for everyone. She said she now understood it was not, and that she was sorry. I told her I appreciated that, and that I wanted the proximity to work, and that working required us to establish what it was going to look like. We spent the next month having what I now think of as the infrastructure conversations. How much unannounced dropping by was okay, what advance notice looked like, what Kevin and I needed to maintain as our own family space, what Margaret needed to feel like the proximity had been worth the move. We negotiated these things like adults. Some of them were uncomfortable. All of them were necessary. Margaret is 2 streets away. She has been there for 7 months. She has come for dinner on the nights we have invited her, and has not shown up on the nights we have not. She has called before coming. She has been, in the 7 months since the infrastructure conversations, almost entirely the neighbor and grandmother I would have chosen if I had been given the choice. The choice was not given to me. The infrastructure was built anyway. Update: 3 months later. Margaret watched the kids last month when Kevin and I had a planned evening out. She arrived at the time we agreed, left at the time we agreed, had both children in bed at their bedtimes, and left a note on the kitchen counter that said the evening had been wonderful and that she loved our family. I read that note 3 times. Kevin read it over my shoulder. He said she is trying. I said I know. We went to bed, and I lay there thinking about a woman who sold her house and bought a new one 2 streets from people she loved because the distance had hurt her for too long, and I thought about what it costs to love someone that much and get the expression of it wrong and then have to learn a new expression, and I thought that the learning was the thing, and that she was doing it, and that it mattered. AITA, Maya Mile told my husband I was cheating on him based on something she saw on my phone. She was wrong, and I have not forgiven her for what happened next. My name is Michelle. I am 36 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 14 months ago my mother-in-law told my husband that she had seen a message on my phone that indicated I was having an affair, and my husband believed her for 4 days before I was able to prove she was wrong. I want to tell you about those 4 days because they are the center of the story, and because what happened in them is something I am still processing. My mother-in-law's name is Gloria. She is 64 years old, and she has never believed I was good enough for her son in the specific way of some mothers who had a different vision for their child's future. She has been civil. She has been present. She has maintained a surface that I had learned to work with over 8 years of marriage to her son. What happened 14 months ago came from under that surface. My husband's name is Jason. We have been married for 8 years, and we have a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie, and our marriage before this incident was good in the ways that matter. Not without difficulty, not without the normal friction of long partnership, but genuinely good in its foundation. Gloria had been visiting for a long weekend. On the Sunday morning of her visit, my phone was on the kitchen counter, and Gloria had been alone in the kitchen while I was getting Sophie ready for the day. I do not know exactly what Gloria saw or how she saw it, whether she picked up my phone or whether a notification appeared on the screen. What I know is what she did with what she saw. She called Jason into the kitchen and she told him that she had seen a message on my phone from a man and that the message had said something that she believed indicated I was involved with someone. The message she described to Jason, I know this because Jason told me what she had described, was a message from my coworker Marcus, who I had been working with on a large project for 3 months. The message was professional. It referenced a meeting and a deadline and nothing else. What Gloria had either misread or misrepresented was its content. I was not in the kitchen when Gloria spoke to Jason. I was upstairs getting Sophie dressed. When I came downstairs, the atmosphere in the kitchen was the specific atmosphere of something having just happened, and I did not know what it was. Jason said nothing to me for 2 hours. He was quiet in the way of someone who is carrying something and deciding what to do with it. When Sophie was down for her afternoon nap and Gloria had gone for a walk, Jason sat down across from me and asked me about Marcus. I told him about Marcus. I told him about the project, the collaboration, the professional relationship that was entirely professional. Jason told me what his mother had told him, I asked to see exactly what she had described because I needed to understand what she had seen. Jason showed me his notes of their conversation. I looked at what Gloria had told him, and I understood that what she had described did not match any message I had exchanged with Marcus, and that what had been communicated to my husband about my fidelity was either a significant misreading or something else. I told Jason this. I told him I wanted to show him my full message history with Marcus, so he could see exactly what our communication looked like.
He said he believed me. He also said he needed some time.
I asked what time meant. He said he needed to process what his mother had told him and what I was telling him, and that he needed space for a day or two. I said I understood, and I did not understand, and I spent the next 4 days in my own home feeling the specific alienation of someone whose integrity is in question in a space that is supposed to be safe. Jason came to me on the 4th day. He said he had reviewed everything I had shown him and had thought carefully, and that he believed me completely, and that he was sorry for the 4 days. He told me he had spoken to Gloria. The conversation with Gloria, by Jason's account, had been the most direct he had been with his mother in our 8 years of marriage. He told her that what she had communicated to him had been inaccurate, and that the inaccuracy had caused damage to his marriage, and that she needed to understand what she had done. Gloria's response, and this is the part one have had the most difficulty with, was that she had only been trying to protect her son, and that any mother would have done the same. She did not say she was wrong. She said she had been trying to protect him. Jason told her that what she had told him had not been accurate, and that protecting him with inaccurate information was not protection. Gloria came to me the following day and said she was sorry if what she had told Jason had caused any difficulty. I want you to note the phrasing.
Sorry if.
Caused any difficulty. I accepted her words because I did not have better options available in the moment, but I have not forgotten them, and I have not forgiven them in the full sense of forgiveness, as something that restores trust. Jason and I are in couples therapy. The 4 days are behind us, and our marriage is solid, and Sophie is doing well, and the daily texture of our life is good. But there is something in me that knows what those 4 days cost, and knows that Gloria's response to what she caused was insufficient, and that I am carrying that knowledge, and have not yet found a place to put it down. Update: 4 months later. Our therapist asked me last month what forgiveness would require from me, and what it would require from Gloria. I sat with the question for a week. What it would require from me is a decision that what I am carrying is costing me more than putting it down would cost. What it would require from Gloria is something more honest than sorry if. I had coffee with Gloria last month, just the two of us, arranged by Jason, who understood it was needed. She said she had been thinking about what had happened, and that she had handled it badly, and that what she had meant as protection had caused harm, and that she was sorry.
Not sorry if. Sorry.
I looked at her across the table, and I said thank you. It was not full forgiveness. It was the first real step toward it, and I am choosing to believe that real steps taken honestly accumulate into something eventually.